USA.com.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. President Trump yesterday in the Oval Office taking queries from the D.C. press corps, one of them as it pertained to the deployment of National Guardsmen in Portland, Oregon, in Chicago, Illinois. The president said this.
Portland is on fire. Portland's been on fire for years, and that's happy that we're there. And the people of Chicago. So you have black women with MAGA hats on in Chicago, all over the place. They want the guard to come in, or they don't care who comes in. They just want to be safe. And I don't care who comes in as long as we're safe. And that's the way most of the public feels. We're going to make Chicago really great again, and we're going to stop this crime. Then we're going to go to another one, and we're going to go city by city. We're going to have safe cities.
And the response yesterday to that extension of a helping hand, well, you know.
They told us that this was about the worst of the worst. In reality, they are going after anyone who objects to families being ripped apart and community members being disappeared. ICE lies and people die. We cannot allow this to continue.
And therefore, declared the mayor.
And today, we are signing an executive order aimed at reining in this out-of-control administration. The order establishes ICE-free zones. That means that city property and unwilling private businesses will no longer serve as staging grounds for these raids.
The time for celebrating yourself will soon be over. BLM Brandon. Jelly Belly, the governor, Spalding, a.k.a. Jelly Belly, a.k.a. Pritzker, had this to say. He wants the goons, 5 arrests, 2 individuals who used lethal force against ICE officers this weekend. He wants those people to stay, and he wants ICE officers to go.
But I want to say this. Peaceful protesters are welcome. Federal agents who abuse their position to terrorize Illinoisans and incite violence are not welcome. They aren't receiving any orders from Trump to cease and desist their aggressive behavior. Remember, they answer only to Trump, not to the people of Illinois. In case there's any doubt about that, Noam, Bovino, and their agents have been escalating the situation outside the ICE facility and inhibiting the Broadview police from doing their jobs. At one point, state police asked CBP leaders for time to move the crowd to avoid any unnecessary confrontations. Rather than give state police time to protect the protesters and the ICE agents, Kristi Noem chose to drive her motorcade through the protesters to create clashes. Shortly after, Bovino came out to threaten mass arrests. These stories are only scratching the surface.
Yeah. The people ramming their cars into ICE vehicles, the University of Chicago professor, sociology professor, assaulting a government employee, the Latin King who put a hit out on Bovino, $2K for information, $10K to take him out. Those aren't the problems. Those aren't the individuals inciting violence, escalating the situation. No. Federal law enforcement officers are. Well, again, what would you expect from a governor who has called 20,000 some ICE agents terrorists, racists, and generously yesterday only called them thugs? Gina Hamilton is the co-founder and president of America First Legal, former White House Deputy Counsel and General Counsel at Department of Homeland Security. Gene, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, I mean, it's a toss-up. Would you like to do ICE-free zones in the city first, or would you like to do Governor Pritzker's litigation against the Trump administration as it pertains to the National Guard deployment?
Well, it's a tough choice, but let's start with ICE-free zones, which are a complete legal and factual fallacy. There is no such thing as an ICE-free zone. The mayor of Chicago, he knows this. He knows that it is legally impermissible, it is unconstitutional for a city to declare itself to be above the federal government in its operations and the enforcement of federal law. We have a thing called the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution that has settled that question since the Constitution was adopted. He knows this. He knows this, but he's doing this because this is a political ploy for him, because he knows that the things that he wants to protect, the kinds of radical ideologies and the types of people that he wants to protect are not the things that have made this country great. He wants to protect the people who have invaded the city of Chicago, who are terrorizing the city of Chicago, illegal criminal aliens who are running rampant all across Chicago and have been. And now that we have a federal government that's willing to step in and do what needs to be done, he has the audacity to step in and say, no ICE, you can't be here. You can't come into this property. You can't come into this area. You can't do this. I'm sorry. He's in for a rude awakening, and any person, any business owner, any person in the city of Chicago who relies upon the mayor's order is in for a big surprise when it comes time for ICE to come knocking at the door.
Excuse me. Do you think that the mayor could have legal exposure? I mean, per what Tom Homan said, if he was seen as crossing the line and actively harboring illegal immigrants and or impeding federal law enforcement from conducting their duties?
Look, that is a factual matter, and there are circumstances in which it could be the case that somebody, whether it's the mayor of Chicago, whether it's an elected official in another city or jurisdiction, could engage in conduct and activity involving an alien, involving somebody who's a subject of arrest by the federal government, that their conduct could rise to the level of obstruction, could rise to the level of interference with the performance of law enforcement duties. And so these city officials, really need to think twice. They really need to examine and decide for themselves if they think that this political gain they're getting from showing up as some kind of savior for criminal illegal aliens is worth the potential of facing jail time when their conduct rises to the level of obstruction of federal law enforcement officers.
It was interesting. After that press conference, there was a press conference from the Superintendent of Chicago Police, Larry Snelling, and a lot of it was focused on the alleged stand down order that was given over the weekend. I'm sure you know about, but in addition to that, he addressed this issue. He's like, look, we are not going to interfere with federal law enforcement from doing their job. They have a job to do. You may not like it, but it is essentially legal, and they're going to do it. And we're not going to be arresting ICE officers. So for anybody who thinks that because of some of the over-the-top rhetoric of politicians that CPD is in a position to take ICE officers into custody because you think they're doing something illegal or when they're just doing something you don't like, you're wrong. So, I mean, it was nice that we got a little bit of moral clarity and legal clarity from the superintendent.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the superintendent recognizes what everyone else in America understands, except for these radical city officials and politicians in Chicago and elsewhere, who have taken this view that somehow, some way, Congress didn't enact laws that prescribe for the regulation of who gets to come in and who gets to leave the country or who has to leave the country. That is a fundamental exercise of sovereignty. And Congress has specified certain powers and duties that immigration officers can carry out in the Immigration and Nationality Act. In 8 U.S.C. 1357, it specifically spells out the different powers and authorities of a law enforcement officer for the Department of Homeland Security. And so the superintendent of police there recognizes that this is the way that it's supposed to be. We can't interfere with the federal government's operations. Yet on the other hand, you have people like the mayor who are more concerned about stopping the federal government from deporting criminal illegal aliens from the streets of Chicago than it is about stopping violence and rampant gang violence and shootings that happen every day and every weekend in Chicago. We all see the headlines.
And per the stand-down order that was given in terms of Chicago police response to federal agents who requested assistance, doesn't that even strengthen the case for President Trump in terms of activating and deploying the National Guard here? Because now you have evidence that local police will not backstop ICE in terms of protection, and so that necessitates a response from the feds to ensure that 14th Amendment equal protection rights are abided, and somebody is there to backstop ICE if they get put under siege again like they were this weekend.
Yeah, it's undoubted that the federal government has the authority, numerous sources of authority, to defend its property, its people, its functions, its operations from threats. And when you have people, whether in Chicago, whether in Portland, whether in any other jurisdiction across the country, who are assaulting law enforcement officers, who are ramming cars on the streets, who are acting with a level of lawlessness that we haven't seen in this country in many, 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 many decades, to say the least. Of course, the federal government has the authority to defend its people, its property, to activate what must be done, to activate the National Guard, to reroute other officers, to call for assistance. These are things that are unquestionable in any kind of civilized society. And the notion that there's some kind of constitutional crisis, the notion that the president is somehow, quote unquote, invading Chicago, the notion that anyone is doing anything wrong here other than these woke liberal city officials and state officials is a complete fallacy. President Trump is doing everything right. He's doing what this country, what the people of this country believe in, what they've supported, things that used to be common sense and accepted on a bipartisan basis, and only aren't now because it serves the radical agendas of people pushing the levers behind the scenes.
On another matter, I wanted to get your legal analysis of this revelation yesterday by the FBI, Cash and Bongino, that Jack Smith and his team investigating and ultimately indicting Trump a few years back, we all recall, was essentially surveilling the phone calls of a little bit more than a half a dozen Republican senators, Grassley, Johnson, Haggerty, Blackburn, and others. Press conference yesterday where Ron Johnson expressed, look, he's not surprised by it because he's been inside the Beltway and he's been talking about this for a long time. But the American people should be outraged by this level of corruption and politicization. I mean, just another layer of evidence here. Just your legal analysis of what Jack Smith did and whether or not, the question with all of this, whether or not there's any potential exposure in terms of the real question of whether there would ever be any accountability for bad actors like Jack Smith.
Well, there certainly must be some kind of accountability for people like Jack Smith, who abused the powers of his office, who abused the authority of the United States to go out on a political basis and target political opponents of the last administration. So whether that's senators, whether that's the former president of the United States himself, other people, other officials, folks who serve, people that I am very close with, good friends of mine, who were targeted by Jack Smith. There must be accountability. There has to be accountability. And I think that people in Congress, whether they're representatives or senators themselves, can really begin to take steps to ensure that that actually happens. And it happens in a better way than just statements that condemn the obviously condemnable actions of Jack Smith and his cronies, but that actually lead to him being held accountable for violating federal law.
Subpoenaing the phone records of sitting United States senators and representatives, wouldn't that necessitate a court order? I mean, did he have the power as a special prosecutor to do that without any sort of evidentiary basis, to subpoena those records without any sort of evidentiary basis?
Look, he in most cases, yes. The answer is yes. He would have had to go to a court and obtain a court order. And so who knows what information he provided the court with about the basis for his inquiry. The amount of information that was presented, whether it was fair, factual, whether it was unbiased, whether he portrayed the entire story. But it's an example of what you see with these people these just crazy ideologues who become so convinced in their minds of something that is just such a fallacy, which at the time he was pursuing the big lie that the left was pushing, which was that there was this insurrection that was trying to overthrow the government. And somehow, in his mind, these senators were part of it. These senators, these phone records must have been part of helping him prove his case that there was some kind of insurrection against the authority of the United States that was led by the former president of the United States, which, of course, he was 100% factually wrong and incorrect. And so what's really going to be interesting to see is what the actual information shows in the FBI's files that he was actually up to and what he presented to the courts as the basis for his inquiries.
Yeah, we need answers to those questions before we can make an assessment about potential legal exposure. That makes sense.
That's right. That's right.
Gene Hamilton is the co-founder and president of America First Legal, former White House deputy counsel and general counsel at the Department of Homeland Security. Gene Hamilton, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
And he joined us in the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, my name is Dr. Michael Huber. During cold and flu season, a nearby cough or sneeze